Mr. Four，你以前喺警隊嘅喎，而家考入嚟 DOJ，一定有你嘅高見嘅。
我覺得我哋呢份工作咧，就好似一盞殘顏嘅明，將有罪嗰啲人定罪，還無辜者清白。
明知道個犯身有事。
我會摧毀一個家庭。
The Prosecutor, 2026, a comprehensive analysis of Donnie Yen's legal action thriller. The Prosecutor, 2026, represents a fascinating evolution in the career of martial arts legend Donnie Yen, who both directs and stars in this ambitious blend of courtroom drama and action thriller. And what follows here is an extensive series of analyses and explanations covering every aspect of the film's production, themes, performances, and cultural significance. Developed with input from China's Supreme People's Procuratorate, the film marks Yen's attempt to expand his dramatic range while satisfying his core fanbase's appetite for spectacular action sequences. The very existence of the Prosecutor suggests a filmmaker aware that the martial arts genre alone cannot sustain a career indefinitely, particularly as physical capabilities naturally diminish with age. By positioning himself within a legal framework, Yen creates a narrative justification for his character's reduced physicality while simultaneously elevating the intellectual dimensions of his screen persona. This duality, brains and brawn operating in tandem, forms the foundational tension that drives much of the film's dramatic energy. The prologue, A Cop's Disillusionment. The film opens with a ballistic prologue set 8 years before the main narrative, immediately establishing the high-octane credentials that audiences expect from a Donnie Yen vehicle. We meet Fok Chi-ho, a hotshot police officer leading a raid against a criminal gang, his confidence and physical prowess on full display as he navigates the dangerous operation. Despite his team's efforts, and a visually spectacular firefight employing first-person shooter perspectives that plunge viewers directly into the chaos, the bad guys slip through the courts due to insufficient hard evidence. Fok testifies with a neck brace, his soul weighed down by procedural failure, and the visual symbolism is unmistakable. The justice system has broken him as surely as any physical opponent ever could. This opening sequence establishes the film's central philosophical question before the main plot even begins. What happens when the system designed to deliver justice becomes an obstacle to achieving it? The first-person shooter cinematography during the raid serves multiple purposes, simultaneously showcasing director Yen's willingness to experiment with visual style, while also creating a visceral immediacy that courtroom scenes alone could never achieve. By opening with action and then pivoting to legal frustration, the prosecutor announces its hybrid intentions from the very first frame. The transformation, from cop to prosecutor. Fox's experience proves transformative, though perhaps not in the way audiences might initially expect from an action star vehicle. Disgusted by how technicalities derailed justice, Fox leaves the force, not to fight from outside the law, but to wield it from within. This decision represents a profound philosophical statement about the nature of justice and how best to achieve it. Rather than becoming a vigilante who operates outside legal constraints, Fox chooses to master the very system that failed him, suggesting a fundamental faith in institutions, even when they have demonstrably failed. He enrolls in law school and reemerges as the oldest rookie at the Hong Kong Department of Justice, a description that carries both comic potential and genuine pathos. The age disparity between Fox and his younger colleagues creates opportunities for humor, his physical confidence contrasting with his professional inexperience, while simultaneously emphasizing the sacrifices he has made in pursuing this career change. The decision to show Fox actually attending law school rather than skipping ahead to his courtroom debut demonstrates the film's commitment to portraying the genuine difficulty of this transformation. This is not a character who simply decides to become a lawyer and instantly excels. He must work for his new identity, struggling through the same educational requirements as any other aspiring prosecutor. The central case, Ma Ka-kit's wrongful conviction. Fox's first major case involves Ma Ka-kit, a naive young man from the slums who has been sentenced to 27 years for drug trafficking after receiving a suspicious package. The character of Ma, played by Mason Fung, serves as the emotional anchor of the film, representing the vulnerable populations most at risk from systemic failures. His innocence is never seriously in question for the audience, which makes watching the legal machinery grind forward despite obvious injustice all the more frustrating. Fox superiors view Ma as just another conviction tally, a statistic that validates the system's effectiveness rather than a human being whose life hangs in the balance. This institutional perspective represents everything Fox left law enforcement to escape, suggesting that the problem was never the police specifically, but rather a broader cultural emphasis on conviction rates over genuine justice. The suspicious package that entraps Ma speaks to the sophisticated methods employed by criminal organizations to recruit unwitting mules, exploiting economic desperation and social vulnerability. Ma's background from the slums is not incidental to his victimization but central to it. The system protects those with resources while consuming those without. Fox's decision to prioritize actual justice over rubber-stamped convictions puts him at odds with colleagues who have vested interests in allowing drug smuggling operations to continue unimpeded, establishing the corrupt institutional framework against which his idealism must struggle. The defense attorneys, generically evil antagonists. Fox discovers that the two attorneys defending Ma, played by Julian Chung and Shirley Chan, are generically evil figures who are willing to eliminate anyone who might testify on behalf of their client. This characterization represents one of the film's weaker elements, according to several critics, who note that the villains lack the complexity that might have elevated the legal drama beyond conventional genre boundaries. Julian Chung, a veteran actor with considerable screen presence, is somewhat wasted in a role that requires little more than menacing glares and sinister smiles. Shirley Chan's character similarly suffers from underdevelopment, her motivations never fully explored beyond the surface-level implication that she serves criminal interests for financial gain or professional advancement. The willingness to eliminate witnesses suggests a ruthlessness that should, in theory, make these characters genuinely terrifying, yet the film's treatment of them as obstacles rather than fully realized antagonists diminishes their impact. A more nuanced approach might have explored why competent attorneys would align themselves with criminal enterprises, perhaps suggesting that the system itself incentivizes such corruption through its emphasis on winning rather than truth-seeking. The generically evil quality of these antagonists also simplifies the moral landscape of the film, removing ambiguity from a story that might have benefited from more complex ethical questions about complicity and corruption. The machinery of justice, a central theme. Unlike standard vigilante fare, the prosecutor grapples with the mechanics of legal accountability in ways that distinguish it from the countless action films where heroes simply bypass the system entirely. Falk never becomes an untouchable legal genius or a simple vigilante hero, a creative decision that grounds the film in a more realistic understanding of how justice actually functions. Instead, he's dogged, sometimes wrong, and constantly fighting against a stacked system that seems designed to protect the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable. This portrayal of institutional resistance to justice reflects genuine frustrations with legal systems worldwide, where procedural requirements can sometimes obstruct rather than facilitate truth-finding. The film interrogates whether the justice system serves truth or merely conviction rates, a question that has profound implications for any society that claims to value due process. By showing Falk's struggle within the system rather than simply abandoning it, the film suggests that reform from within is both more difficult and more valuable than extralegal action. The emphasis on procedure and evidence, rather than simply identifying the guilty party, demonstrates a respect for legal principles that seems somewhat at odds with the film's action sequences. Yet this tension, between the patient work of building a case and the immediate satisfaction of physical confrontation, mirrors the broader thematic conflict between institutional change and individual action. The cost of idealism, Falk's personal sacrifice. Falk's character arc embodies the human cost of maintaining moral integrity within a compromised institution, a theme that gives the prosecutor emotional weight beyond its genre trappings. His transformation from overzealous cop to prosecutor reflects a belief that justice requires patience and procedure, not just force, yet the film does not pretend that this transformation comes without consequence. Falk faces obstruction, threats, and physical danger because he refuses to look away from injustice, and each of these challenges extracts a toll on his body and spirit. The physical violence directed against him suggests that the system's defenders will go to any lengths to protect their interests, including attacking those who work within the same institutional framework. This creates a sense of isolation for Falk, who cannot rely on colleagues who either actively oppose him or simply lack the courage to support his crusade. The psychological burden of this isolation is communicated through Yen's performance, which captures both the determination and the weariness of a man fighting alone against overwhelming odds. The film does not suggest that idealism is futile. Falk's persistence ultimately matters, but it refuses to pretend that moral courage comes without significant personal cost. This realistic portrayal of the price of integrity distinguishes the prosecutor from more simplistic narratives where heroes triumph without meaningful sacrifice. Metatextual reading, Donnie Yen's career reflection. Critics have noted that the prosecutor functions as a meta-commentary on Yen's own career trajectory, a reading that adds layers of meaning for audiences familiar with his decades of work in Hong Kong cinema. At 61, Yen is actively finding ways to ask more of himself, at a time when the Hong Kong film industry might expect less of him, and this professional ambition is reflected in Falk's determination to reinvent himself professionally. The character's lines, "I'm getting old, I can't catch thieves anymore," mirror the actor's own negotiation with aging in a physically demanding profession, acknowledging limitations while simultaneously demonstrating that intellectual capabilities remain sharp. This metatextual dimension transforms the prosecutor from a standalone entertainment into a statement about artistic evolution and the refusal to be defined by past successes. Yen has built his career on spectacular physical prowess, but the prosecutor argues that his value as a performer extends beyond martial arts choreography into dramatic acting and directorial vision. The film's willingness to engage with questions of aging and legacy suggests an artist contemplating his own place in cinema history, wondering what remains when the physical gifts that made him famous inevitably diminish. This vulnerability, the willingness to expose artistic insecurity through fictional proxy, represents a significant creative risk that many action stars would avoid. By embracing rather than denying the reality of aging, Yen demonstrates a maturity that complements his established skills as a martial artist. Genre analysis, the hybrid approach. The film's most distinctive feature is its tonal juggling act, a creative gamble that has polarized critics but undeniably distinguishes the prosecutor from more conventional genre exercises. One scene features Yen sporting a barrister's wig and shouting, "My learned colleague," in English at a flustered defense attorney. The next finds him fending off triad goons with a hockey stick, creating whiplash-inducing transitions between legal decorum and physical violence. This genre-bending approach has some critics embracing the lively, if somewhat melodramatic, energy while others find the tonal shifts jarring, suggesting that the hybrid experiment succeeds for some viewers while alienating others. The barrister's wig represents the formal traditions of Hong Kong's legal system, inherited from British colonial rule and maintained as symbols of institutional legitimacy. When Falk wears this wig while engaging in physical combat, the image captures the film's central tension between procedural formality and direct action. The hockey stick as an improvised weapon further emphasizes this contrast, substituting everyday objects for the specialized tools of violence that typically appear in martial arts films. These juxtapositions create a visual language that communicates the film's thematic concerns even before dialogue or plot developments make them explicit. The tonal inconsistencies that some critics identify may actually be intentional, reflecting the genuine disorientation that would accompany attempts to reconcile such different approaches to justice. Action choreography, gritty and grounded. The fight sequences, staged by Japanese action directors Takahito Aoki and Kenji Tanigaki, are described as gritty, grounded set pieces that are both visceral and emotionally charged, representing a deliberate departure from the more stylized martial arts ballets of Yen's earlier career. This choreographic choice reflects both the film's realistic tone and Yen's evolving physical capabilities, favoring impact over elegance and consequence over spectacle. Notable sequences include a nightclub brawl on a rooftop, where the urban setting provides both visual interest and practical challenges for the fighters involved. The climactic fight aboard a life-sized, specially constructed metro train set represents the film's most ambitious action sequence, combining confined spaces with moving vehicles to create claustrophobic tension. The opening raid that employs first-person shooter cinematography demonstrates the production's willingness to experiment with visual presentation, borrowing techniques from video games to create immersive action. Critics note that the action scales down to a more human level that emphasizes fists over guns as the film progresses, reflecting Yen's age while demonstrating his enduring skill in close-quarters combat. This evolution from firearms to hand-to-hand combat suggests a thematic progression as well, moving from the impersonal violence of institutional enforcement to the intimate confrontation of personal justice. The choreography emphasizes the physical toll of violence, showing characters winded, injured, and exhausted rather than maintaining superheroic invulnerability throughout extended fight sequences. The opening raid, technical innovation and thematic foundation. The film's opening raid sequence deserves particular attention for its technical ambition and thematic significance, establishing the tone for everything that follows. The use of first-person shooter perspectives represents a bold stylistic choice for a Hong Kong action film, borrowing visual language from video games to create immersive immediacy. This technique places viewers directly within the action, seeing through the eyes of participants rather than observing from a safe distance. The effect is disorienting in productive ways, communicating the chaos and confusion of real combat rather than the clean choreography of traditional action cinema. The raid's outcome, the criminals escaping justice through legal technicalities, establishes the film's central conflict between effective enforcement and procedural correctness. Falk's neck brace during his subsequent testimony serves as a physical manifestation of the system's failure, his injured body representing the damage done to justice itself when guilty parties evade accountability. The transition from the visceral action of the raid to the frustration of the courtroom creates a rhythm that the film will repeat throughout its runtime, alternating between physical and legal confrontations. This opening sequence also introduces the visual distinction between action and legal scenes that will structure the entire film, with the former characterized by dynamic camera movement and the latter by static formality. The contrast between these modes communicates the film's thematic argument about the relationship between force and procedure without requiring explicit statement. The nightclub rooftop brawl, urban violence and social context. The nightclub brawl on a rooftop represents one of the film's standout action sequences, combining spectacular choreography with meaningful social context that elevates it beyond mere spectacle. Nightclubs in Hong Kong cinema often serve as sites of criminal activity and moral corruption, representing the underground economy that operates parallel to legitimate society. By staging a fight on the rooftop, the film positions this violence literally above the heads of ordinary citizens, suggesting the hidden nature of criminal operations that flourish despite legal prohibitions. The rooftop setting also provides practical advantages for action choreography, offering multiple levels and obstacles that creative fight staging can exploit for visual variety. The brawl itself demonstrates Yen's continued mastery of martial arts filmmaking, with clearly articulated spatial relationships between combatants that allow audiences to follow complex sequences without confusion. Unlike the chaotic first-person perspective of the opening raid, this sequence employs more conventional cinematography that showcases the choreographic precision of the performers. The emotional stakes of the fight are established through Fox's determination to protect witnesses who might testify for Ma, connecting the physical violence directly to the legal case at the film's center. This integration of action and plot demonstrates the film's commitment to making fight scenes matter narratively rather than including them as disconnected set pieces designed solely to showcase Yen's abilities. The metro train climax, confined space and escalating tension. The climactic fight aboard a life-sized, specially constructed metro train set represents the film's most technically ambitious action sequence, requiring significant production resources to execute convincingly. The choice of a metro train as the setting for the final confrontation carries multiple symbolic meanings, representing the public transportation systems that serve ordinary citizens and the vulnerability of these systems to criminal violence. The confined space of the train cars creates natural limitations on movement that force creative choreographic solutions, with fighters using seats, poles, and doors as both obstacles and opportunities. The moving train adds an element of urgency to the proceedings, suggesting that the conflict must be resolved before the journey ends or the vehicle reaches its destination. This temporal constraint mirrors the legal deadline pressures that Fox faces in his courtroom work, creating thematic resonance between the action and legal elements of the film. The production design of the metro set demonstrates the resources invested in the Prosecutor, with convincing detail that sells the illusion of a functioning transit system. The fight choreography within this environment emphasizes the physical toll of sustained combat, showing both Fox and his opponents growing increasingly exhausted as the sequence progresses. This realistic portrayal of fatigue distinguishes the film from more fantastical action cinema, where fighters maintain peak performance regardless of duration or injury. Critical reception, praise for Yen's dual role. Filmfare's review awarding 3.5 out of 5 stars called the film a genre-bending actioner that works because of Donnie Yen, praising his dual role as actor and director in terms that acknowledge his central importance to the project's success. The review's emphasis on Yen's dual responsibilities suggests that the Prosecutor represents a personal vision rather than a studio-driven product, with the star's creative control evident in both the film's ambitions and its limitations. IndieWire commended Yen's full-bodied commitment and the film's embrace of his age without diminishing his skill, recognizing that aging gracefully in action cinema requires careful negotiation between audience expectations and physical reality. This praise for acknowledging age rather than denying it suggests that authenticity resonates with critics, even when it means accepting limitations. Variety noted the film topped the Hong Kong box office for 2 weeks, praising Yen's convincing and charismatic performance while acknowledging the commercial success that his presence guaranteed. The box office performance indicates that Hong Kong audiences remained eager to support Yen's work even when he ventures beyond his established comfort zone. Deadline described it as a slickly polished slice of mainstream entertainment, recognizing the production values and professional execution that characterize the film despite its tonal inconsistencies. These positive reviews share an appreciation for Yen's ambition, even when acknowledging that the hybrid approach creates structural challenges that the film does not always successfully navigate. Critical reservations, tonal inconsistencies, and underdeveloped elements. The Guardian found the courtroom elements less convincing than the action, calling the film bizarre in its genre hybrid and suggesting that the legal drama never achieves the same level of quality as the fight sequences. This criticism reflects the challenge of executing 2 different genres at equally high levels, with the courtroom scenes suffering from comparison to specialized legal dramas that focus exclusively on procedural elements. IndieWire criticized the screenplay as hurried and ham-fisted, noting that the legal case lacks the intensity of the surrounding chaos, and that the script fails to develop its courtroom elements with the same care as its action sequences. The characterization of the screenplay as hurried suggests that the film tries to accomplish too much within its runtime, moving between genres without giving either sufficient space to develop. Letterboxd reviews cited tonal inconsistencies, including confusing transitions between locations and underutilized characters like Shirley Chan's lawyer, suggesting that the film's editing fails to create smooth connections between its various elements. The specific mention of location confusion indicates that the film's visual storytelling sometimes fails to orient viewers in space, an especially problematic issue given the importance of spatial relationships in action cinema. These critical reservations share a common concern: that the prosecutor attempts an ambitious hybrid but lacks the structural integrity to hold its disparate elements together as a coherent whole. Production context, creative team, and institutional collaboration. The creative team behind The Prosecutor represents a combination of established Hong Kong cinema professionals and specialists brought in for specific elements. Director Donnie Yen's dual role as star and director gives him unprecedented creative control over the project, allowing him to shape both the action sequences and dramatic scenes according to his vision. Screenplay writer Edmund Wong, a regular Ip Man screenwriter, brings experience with Yen's established franchise work, understanding how to structure stories that showcase the star's abilities while developing meaningful dramatic content. This existing working relationship likely facilitated the development of a script that balances action requirements with the more dialogue-heavy legal scenes that represent new territory for both star and screenwriter. Action directors Kenji Tanigaki, Takahito Aoki, and Kong Yu bring diverse expertise in martial arts choreography, with Tanigaki's work on films like Rurouni Kenshin demonstrating skill in adapting comic book action to live-action cinema. The casting combines established Hong Kong stars like Francis Ng, Julian Chung, and Kent Chung with younger performers like Mason Fung and Shirley Chan, creating a multi-generational ensemble that reflects the film's thematic interest in passing knowledge and values across age boundaries. Michael Huey's presence is particularly notable given his reputation as a comedian, suggesting that The Prosecutor may incorporate elements of humor alongside its more serious themes. The involvement of China's Supreme People's Procuratorate in the film's development ensures accurate representation of legal procedures, while also imposing certain political constraints on the narrative's treatment of the justice system. Release and distribution, commercial performance, and streaming availability. The Prosecutor opened in Hong Kong in December 2024, topping the local box office for 2 weeks and demonstrating Yen's continued commercial viability despite his advancing age and the film's departure from his established formula. This box office success suggests that Hong Kong audiences remain willing to support innovative projects from beloved stars, particularly when those projects maintain the action elements that define the star's appeal. The limited U.S. theatrical release in January 2025 reflects the challenges of marketing Hong Kong films to American audiences, with niche appeal limiting the scope of theatrical distribution. The film's availability on streaming platforms, including Lionsgate Play in mid-2025, represents the changing landscape of film distribution, where international audiences increasingly access Hong Kong cinema through digital platforms rather than theatrical exhibition. This streaming availability ensures the film's accessibility to global audiences who might have missed the limited theatrical release. The staggered release pattern, Hong Kong theatrical, then limited U.S. theatrical, then streaming, reflects contemporary distribution strategies that maximize revenue across multiple windows while building audience awareness through gradual expansion. The presence of major Western outlets like Variety, Deadline, IndieWire, and The Guardian in reviewing the film indicates its significance beyond the Hong Kong market, with international critics engaging seriously with Yen's directorial ambitions even when expressing reservations about the final product. Political context, pro-establishment messaging. The film carries overt messaging about the eternal light of justice that some critics find hokey as hell, reflecting a tone that seems designed to reassure audiences about the fundamental soundness of the legal system. Several reviews note the film's clear endorsement of China's legal system, with one critic describing it as propaganda for how great the government is in regards to its justice system. This pro-establishment stance, unsurprising given the Supreme People's Procurator's involvement, represents a significant departure from the anti-authoritarian strain common in earlier Hong Kong action cinema. The political implications of this shift deserve careful consideration, as they reflect broader changes in Hong Kong's cultural landscape since the territory's return to Chinese sovereignty. Earlier Hong Kong action films frequently portrayed police and legal institutions as corrupt, incompetent, or actively hostile to justice, reflecting a skepticism toward authority rooted in colonial experience and democratic aspirations. The prosecutor's celebration of institutional justice within China's legal framework represents an accommodation to political realities that many Hong Kong filmmakers have had to navigate in recent years. The film's treatment of corruption as exceptional rather than systemic, as represented by individual bad actors rather than fundamental institutional flaws, aligns with official Chinese narratives about the effectiveness of legal reform. This political dimension adds complexity to the film's reception, with some viewers appreciating its sincere engagement with legal process, while others view it as capitulation to political pressure. The relationship between physical and legal justice. The prosecutor's most significant thematic contribution to action cinema may be its exploration of the relationship between physical force and legal procedure as complementary rather than opposing methods of achieving justice. Traditional action films often portray the legal system as an obstacle to justice, with heroes needing to bypass procedural requirements to achieve the outcomes that audiences desire. The prosecutor reverses this dynamic, suggesting that the physical force that defines action cinema is most effective when deployed in service of legal processes rather than as a substitute for them. Fox's physical capabilities remain impressive, but they serve to protect witnesses, gather evidence, and ensure that legal proceedings can continue rather than replacing those proceedings with direct violent action. This integration of action and legality suggests a more mature understanding of justice than the vigilante fantasy that dominates the action genre. The film's acknowledgement that Fox's physical abilities have limitations, the line about being too old to catch thieves, further reinforces the importance of institutional frameworks that persist beyond individual capabilities. A justice system that depends on the physical prowess of individual heroes is inherently fragile, while one that operates through procedures and evidence can continue functioning regardless of who occupies its offices. The prosecutor seems to argue for this institutional approach to justice, even while celebrating the individual heroics that remain necessary to protect the system from those who would corrupt it. Character analysis. Fok Chi-ho as idealist and warrior. Fok Chi-ho represents an unusual action hero in his willingness to subordinate physical prowess to legal procedure, a characterization that distinguishes him from the vigilante figures who dominate the genre. His journey from police officer to prosecutor suggests a belief that the most effective way to change the system is from within, working through established channels rather than operating outside them. This institutional orientation requires patience and frustration tolerance that action heroes typically lack, with Fok accepting procedural delays and evidentiary requirements that would drive traditional protagonists to direct action. Yet the film does not portray Fok as passive or accepting of injustice. His physical confrontations with criminals demonstrate continued willingness to employ force when necessary. The key distinction is that Fok's violence serves legal ends rather than substituting for them, protecting the process rather than bypassing it. This characterization requires Donnie Yen to portray both intellectual and physical capability, expanding his performance range beyond the martial arts expertise that defined his earlier work. The contradiction between Fok's impulsive past as a cop and his patient present as a prosecutor creates internal tension that Yen communicates through physical performance, suggesting the effort required to restrain impulses that once served him well. This internal conflict gives the character depth beyond what the screenplay alone provides, with Yen's embodiment of these tensions adding layers of meaning to the role. Supporting characters. The ensemble around Fok. The supporting cast of The Prosecutor provides context and contrast for Fok's journey, though critics have noted that some characters receive insufficient development. Francis Ng, a veteran actor of considerable skill, presumably plays a role that allows him to demonstrate his characteristic intensity, though reviews suggest his talents may be underutilized by a screenplay focused primarily on Yen's protagonist. Julian Chung and Shirley Chan as the corrupt defense attorneys represent the film's most problematic characterization, with their generically evil quality failing to provide the complexity that might have elevated the legal drama. The decision to portray these characters without nuance simplifies the moral landscape unnecessarily, removing questions about motivation and complicity that might have deepened the film's engagement with legal ethics. Mason Fung as Ma Ka-kit carries significant emotional weight as the innocent victim whose plight motivates Fox Crusade. Though the character's limited screen time may prevent audiences from developing the investment necessary to fully engage with his fate. Kent Cheng's presence in the cast suggests experience and gravitas, presumably playing a senior figure within the legal system whose perspective on Fox methods provides institutional context. Michael Huey's involvement raises questions about the film's comic elements, as Huey's reputation as a comedian suggests that the prosecutor may incorporate humor in ways that critics have not fully explored in their reviews. The ensemble's diversity of age and experience creates a multi-generational dynamic that reflects the film's interest in questions of legacy and institutional memory. Directorial vision. Donnie Yen behind the camera. Donnie Yen's direction of the prosecutor represents a significant evolution in his filmmaking career, building on previous directorial experience while expanding into new genre territory. The decision to direct as well as star creates unique challenges, requiring Yen to split attention between performance and overall filmmaking responsibilities. The film's visual style reflects both Yen's action expertise and his developing skills in dramatic direction, with action sequences benefiting from his decades of experience, while legal scenes demonstrate his growth in more subtle storytelling techniques. The tonal inconsistency that critics have identified may stem from Yen's relative inexperience with legal drama, as he navigates unfamiliar territory without the intuitive understanding that guides his action direction. The choice of Japanese action directors for fight choreography suggests a willingness to incorporate outside perspectives even in areas where Yen possesses considerable expertise. This collaborative approach to filmmaking indicates a director secure enough in his abilities to accept input from specialists without feeling threatened by their contributions. The involvement of China's Supreme People's Procuratorate in the development process likely constrained Yen's directorial choices regarding the legal system's portrayal, requiring him to balance creative vision with institutional requirements. The resulting film reflects these various influences, creating a work that is both personal expression and institutional product. Screenplay analysis. Edmund Wong's script. Edmund Wong's screenplay for The Prosecutor attempts the difficult task of balancing action sequences with legal drama, creating structural challenges that the script does not always successfully navigate. The decision to open with an action prologue before transitioning to the legal narrative establishes the film's hybrid nature immediately, preparing audiences for the tonal shifts that follow. The 8-year gap between prologue and main narrative creates space for Fox's transformation from cop to prosecutor, though this ellipsis also means that audiences do not witness the character development that motivates his career change. The legal case at the film's center is relatively straightforward: an innocent man framed by criminals, lacking the complexity that might have engaged audiences more deeply in the procedural elements. The corrupt defense attorneys serve their narrative function as obstacles to justice, but their lack of development prevents the legal drama from achieving the moral complexity that characterizes the best examples of the genre. The dialogue in courtroom scenes demonstrates research into legal terminology and procedure, with the phrase "my learned colleague" suggesting attention to the formal language of Hong Kong's legal system. The screenplay's action sequences provide opportunities for Yen to demonstrate his physical abilities while advancing the plot, though the connection between violence and legal outcomes sometimes feels strained. The script's treatment of institutional corruption focuses on individual bad actors rather than systemic problems, a choice that aligns with the film's pro-establishment messaging while limiting its potential for social criticism. Action direction. The work of Aoki and Tanigaki. The action direction by Takahito Aoki and Kenji Tanigaki brings Japanese martial arts cinema expertise to the Hong Kong production, creating fight sequences that differ in style and emphasis from Yen's earlier work with other choreographers. The focus on gritty, grounded set pieces suggests a commitment to realism that distinguishes these sequences from the more stylized martial arts ballets that characterized some of Yen's previous films. This grounded approach aligns with the film's overall tone, which emphasizes the consequences of violence rather than celebrating it as pure spectacle. The first-person shooter sequence in the opening raid represents a technical departure that required specialized cinematography and editing, with Aoki and Tanigaki adapting their choreographic skills to this unusual visual perspective. The nightclub rooftop brawl demonstrates the choreographer's ability to use environment creatively, incorporating the setting's architecture into the fight choreography rather than treating it as mere backdrop. The metro train sequence represents the most complex action set piece, requiring careful coordination between performers, camera operators, and the specially constructed set to create the illusion of a functioning transit system under attack. The progression from gun-based action to hand-to-hand combat throughout the film suggests deliberate choreographic choices that reflect both Yen's aging physicality and the film's thematic movement toward more personal, intimate forms of conflict. The action director's experience with Japanese action cinema brings different conventions and techniques to the Hong Kong context, creating a hybrid approach to fight choreography that distinguishes The Prosecutor from more conventional examples of the genre. Box office performance. Commercial success amid critical division. The Prosecutor's success at the Hong Kong box office, topping charts for 2 weeks, demonstrates that critical reservations did not prevent commercial achievement, with audiences supporting the film despite its tonal inconsistencies. This commercial success has multiple implications for Donnie Yen's career and for the Hong Kong film industry more broadly. The willingness of audiences to embrace a genre hybrid suggests openness to innovation, even when critics express reservations about execution. Yen's star power clearly remains a significant draw, with his presence alone sufficient to attract audiences regardless of the film's experimental qualities. The box office performance may encourage further experiments in genre blending from other Hong Kong filmmakers, demonstrating that audiences will support ambitious projects that attempt to expand beyond established formulas. The 2-week run at the top of the chart suggests strong word of mouth, with initial audiences recommending the film to others despite whatever reservations they may have had about specific elements. This pattern indicates that the film's strengths, Yen's performance, the action sequences, the sincere engagement with legal themes, resonated with general audiences even when critics focused on structural problems. The commercial success may also reflect the limited competition during the December release period, with The Prosecutor benefiting from holiday season moviegoing and the absence of major Hollywood releases competing for the same audience. International reception. Western critics respond. The international critical response to The Prosecutor reveals both appreciation for Yen's ambition and frustration with the film's execution, with Western critics bringing different expectations and frameworks to their analysis than Hong Kong reviewers. IndieWire's praise for Yen's full-bodied commitment suggests that his performance transcends the limitations of the screenplay, with the actor's dedication to the role evident even in scenes that fail dramatically. The same review's criticism of the screenplay as hurried and ham-fisted indicates that Western critics held the film to standards of narrative coherence that it did not always meet. Variety's description of the film topping Hong Kong box office for 2 weeks contextualizes the commercial success for Western readers who may not follow Asian box office trends, establishing the film's significance within its home market. Deadline's characterization of the film as slickly polished mainstream entertainment suggests appreciation for production values even when the content lacks depth. The Guardian's description of the film as bizarre in its genre hybrid reflects a particular critical perspective that values tonal consistency and may be less comfortable with the deliberate juxtapositions that characterize Hong Kong action cinema. These varied responses demonstrate the challenges of translating Hong Kong's cinematic conventions for Western audiences, with elements that resonate domestically sometimes confusing international viewers. The international distribution through Lionsgate Play suggests that distributors recognize the film's potential appeal beyond Hong Kong despite these cultural translation challenges. The Supreme People's Procurator's involvement. The collaboration with China's Supreme People's Procuratorate represents an unprecedented level of institutional involvement in a Hong Kong action film, with implications for both the film's content and its political significance. This collaboration ensured accurate representation of legal procedures, with the film's courtroom scenes presumably reflecting actual practices within China's prosecutorial system. The institutional involvement also likely influenced the film's positive portrayal of China's legal system, with corruption represented as exceptional rather than systemic, and the overall message celebrating the effectiveness of legal institutions. This pro-institutional stance represents a significant departure from the anti-authoritarian traditions of Hong Kong action cinema, reflecting the changing political landscape of the territory since its return to Chinese sovereignty. The involvement of the Supreme People's Procuratorate suggests that Chinese authorities recognize the potential of popular entertainment to shape public perceptions of legal institutions. By associating the Procuratorate with beloved star Donnie Yen, The film creates positive associations between popular culture and legal authority that might influence audience attitudes toward the justice system. This propagandistic dimension adds complexity to the film's reception, with some viewers appreciating its sincere engagement with legal process, while others view it as politically compromised. The international distribution of a film developed with Chinese government involvement raises questions about soft power and cultural diplomacy, with the Prosecutor serving as an example of Chinese institutional influence extending into global entertainment markets. Age and action. Donnie Yen at 61. The Prosecutor's engagement with Donnie Yen's age represents one of its most distinctive features, with the film acknowledging rather than denying the physical limitations that come with advancing years. The character's line, "I'm getting old, I can't catch thieves anymore," articulates this acknowledgement explicitly, creating a rare moment of vulnerability in action cinema where heroes typically maintain ageless physical capability. This honesty about aging distinguishes The Prosecutor from the many action films that cast older stars in roles written for younger performers, creating uncomfortable disjunctions between actor age and character capability. Yen's willingness to embrace his age through Fox's character suggests confidence in his continued relevance, even as his physical abilities evolve. The film's action choreography adapts to Yen's age, with the progression from gunplay to hand-to-hand combat reflecting an acknowledgement that intimate, technique-based fighting remains viable even as more acrobatic styles become challenging. This adaptation demonstrates the resilience of martial arts as a cinematic language, capable of accommodating performers at different stages of physical development. The metatextual dimension of this aging narrative adds layers of meaning for audiences familiar with Yen's career, transforming what might otherwise be a straightforward action film into a meditation on artistic evolution and legacy. The success of this approach may inspire other aging action stars to embrace rather than resist the aging process, creating more honest representations of physical capability in action cinema. The hockey stick fight, improvised weapons, and everyday heroism. The hockey stick fight sequence represents one of the film's most distinctive action moments, with Fox employing an everyday object as an improvised weapon rather than relying on specialized martial arts equipment. This choice of weapon carries symbolic meaning, suggesting that the skills necessary for justice are available to everyone, not just those with specialized training. The hockey stick's association with Western sports adds cultural significance, representing Hong Kong's colonial heritage and the hybrid nature of its legal system. The improvisational quality of using whatever is available reflects the resourcefulness required of those fighting against systems that hold institutional power. The hockey stick fight also demonstrates Yen's choreographic creativity, finding new possibilities in an unexpected object rather than relying on established martial arts conventions. The sequence likely generates audience pleasure through the unexpectedness of the weapon choice, with viewers responding to the novelty of seeing Yen fight with something other than his fists or traditional weapons. The practical challenges of choreographing with an unfamiliar weapon would have required significant rehearsal, with the fight team working to make the hockey stick's use feel natural rather than forced. This sequence exemplifies the film's approach to action as grounded in everyday reality rather than fantasy, with Fox using the tools available in his environment rather than possessing specialized equipment. Cinematography. Visual storytelling across genres. The cinematography of The Prosecutor must serve two distinct modes of storytelling, adapting visual approach to suit both action sequences and courtroom drama. The action scenes employ dynamic camera movement and varied perspectives, including the first-person shooter sequence that places viewers within the action. The legal scenes likely employ more static, formal compositions that reflect the structured nature of courtroom proceedings. The contrast between these visual modes reinforces the film's thematic exploration of the relationship between physical and legal justice. The nighttime settings of many action sequences create shadows and contrasts that add visual interest, while also suggesting the moral ambiguity of the criminal underworld. The courtroom's bright, even lighting represents institutional clarity and the ideal of justice as transparent and accessible. The transitions between these visual modes may contribute to the tonal inconsistency that critics identified, with the shift from dynamic action to static legal scenes creating jarring juxtapositions. The cinematography's handling of the metro train sequence represents particular technical achievement, maintaining visual clarity within a confined, moving space while following complex fight choreography. The opening raid's first-person perspective required specialized camera rigs and post-production work to maintain consistency, while allowing the flexibility necessary for action choreography. Sound design, audio texture across genres. The sound design of The Prosecutor contributes significantly to the film's tonal texture, with different audio approaches for action and legal scenes. The action sequences likely employ the exaggerated impact sounds characteristic of martial arts cinema, with enhanced punches and kicks creating visceral intensity that communicates the physical stakes of conflict. The first-person shooter sequence would require particular attention to spatial audio, with directional sound cues helping viewers orient themselves within the chaos of the raid. The courtroom scenes demand different audio treatment, with dialogue clarity prioritized and ambient noise minimized to focus attention on legal argument. The transition between these audio modes may contribute to the tonal shifts that critics identified, with viewers required to adjust their listening expectations as scenes change. The metro train sequence presents unique sound design challenges, requiring the creation of convincing train noise that enhances the sense of motion without overwhelming the fight sounds that audiences expect from action cinema. The musical score presumably bridges these different modes, with action-oriented music during fight sequences and more subdued scoring during legal scenes. The overall audio mix must balance these competing demands, creating a soundscape that serves both the action and legal elements of the film. Editing, pacing, and structural challenges. The editing of The Prosecutor faces the challenge of integrating action and legal sequences into a coherent whole, with pacing decisions affecting how audiences experience the film's tonal shifts. The contrast between the rapid cutting typical of action sequences and the longer takes appropriate for legal drama creates editing rhythms that change dramatically throughout the film. These shifts in editing pace may contribute to the disorientation that some critics identified, with viewers required to adjust their expectations as scenes change. The 8-year transition between prologue and main narrative requires editing choices that communicate the passage of time efficiently without losing audience engagement. The integration of flashbacks or memories might have been employed to connect Fox's past as a police officer with his present as a prosecutor, using editing to establish psychological continuity across the temporal gap. The courtroom scenes editing must balance coverage of different speakers with reaction shots, creating rhythm through visual alternation rather than physical movement. The climactic metro train sequence represents the most complex editing challenge, requiring integration of fight choreography, train motion, and narrative resolution into a satisfying conclusion. Production design, creating the world of the film. The production design of The Prosecutor creates distinct visual environments for the film's different settings, with the courtroom, the streets of Hong Kong, and the criminal underworld each receiving distinctive treatment. The courtroom set likely emphasizes formality and tradition, with wood paneling, elevated benches, and other architectural features that communicate institutional authority. The legal costumes, particularly the barristers' wigs that evoke British colonial heritage, reinforce this sense of tradition and ceremony. The contrast between these formal spaces and the grittier environments where action sequences occur emphasizes the distance between legal ideals and street-level reality. The nightclub setting for the rooftop brawl requires production design that suggests both entertainment and danger, with lighting and decoration creating an atmosphere of glamour that masks criminal activity. The metro train set represents the production's most significant design challenge, requiring construction of a convincing transit environment that accommodates fight choreography while maintaining the illusion of a functioning train. The film's Hong Kong setting grounds the story in a specific urban environment, with production design capturing the density and verticality of the city that shapes both its legal institutions and its criminal enterprises. Costume design, clothing as character. The costume design of The Prosecutor communicates character through clothing choices, with different styles establishing social position and personal orientation. Fox's transformation from police officer to prosecutor involves significant costume changes, with the casual clothing of law enforcement giving way to the formal attire of legal practice. The barrister's wig that Yen wears in courtroom scenes represents the most distinctive costume element, immediately communicating the character's new professional identity, while also creating visual contrast with his action sequences. The wig's symbolic weight derives from Hong Kong's colonial history, representing legal traditions inherited from British rule that persist in the post-colonial era. The juxtaposition of this formal headwear with physical combat creates striking images that capture the film's thematic interests. The corrupt defense attorneys' costumes presumably communicate their affluence and professional success, with expensive clothing suggesting the financial rewards of their unethical practices. Ma Ka-kit's clothing would reflect his working-class background, creating visual contrast with the legal professionals who determine his fate. The criminal characters' costumes likely follow genre conventions, with the visual signifiers of wealth and power that distinguish crime bosses from their subordinates. These costume choices contribute to characterization without requiring explicit exposition, allowing audiences to understand social position through visual information. Thematic analysis: the eternal light of justice. The film's central thematic concern with justice, represented through the eternal light of justice that some critics find hokey as hell, deserves more serious consideration than dismissal as mere sentimentality allows. The concept of justice as eternal and unchanging serves specific narrative and ideological functions within the film, providing moral grounding for Fox actions while also aligning with official Chinese narratives about legal reform. The imagery of light as justice draws on long philosophical and religious traditions that associate illumination with truth and darkness with corruption. This metaphorical framework gives the film's legal drama moral weight beyond procedural technicalities, suggesting that what is at stake in courtroom battles is nothing less than the triumph of truth over falsehood. The explicit articulation of this theme, rather than leaving it implicit in the narrative, reflects the film's pedagogical ambitions, seeking to educate audiences about legal values while entertaining them with action sequences. The hokey quality that critics identify may stem from the disjunction between this elevated rhetoric and the film's more visceral action elements, with audiences struggling to reconcile philosophical abstraction with physical violence. Yet the tension between ideals and action may be precisely the point, suggesting that justice requires both the eternal principles represented in legal rhetoric and the immediate physical intervention represented in fight sequences. Corruption and institutional failure. The prosecutor's treatment of corruption within the legal system reflects its political positioning, with corruption represented as the work of individual bad actors rather than a systemic problem requiring structural reform. The corrupt defense attorneys who serve criminal interests represent exceptions to the rule of law, aberrations that can be identified and removed without questioning the fundamental soundness of the legal system itself. This framing aligns with official Chinese narratives that acknowledge corruption as a problem while insisting that institutions remain fundamentally sound and capable of self-correction. The alternative framing, that corruption is endemic to the system itself, would require more radical critique than the film's institutional backing would permit. Fox colleagues who prioritize conviction rates over genuine justice represent a more subtle form of institutional failure, with careerism and bureaucratic inertia serving as obstacles to justice even without explicit corruption. This portrayal suggests that the system's failures stem from human weakness rather than structural flaws, with individual choices determining whether institutions serve justice or merely serve themselves. The film's resolution presumably reaffirms institutional integrity, with corruption exposed and justice achieved through proper procedures rather than revolutionary change. This conservative approach to institutional critique limits the film's potential for social commentary while ensuring its alignment with official perspectives on legal reform. The prosecutor as legal educator. The prosecutor's development with input from China's Supreme People's Procuratorate suggests pedagogical ambitions beyond mere entertainment, with the film serving to educate audiences about legal processes and values. This educational function has precedence in Chinese cinema, where films have often served explicit ideological purposes alongside entertainment functions. The accurate representation of legal procedures presumably reflects the institutional desire to increase public understanding of how the justice system operates. This educational dimension may explain the film's willingness to explain legal concepts in dialogue rather than assuming audience familiarity with courtroom procedure. The film's celebration of due process, even when it creates obstacles to justice, communicates the value of procedural protections that might otherwise seem to favor criminals. The portrayal of evidence gathering as essential to legal success emphasizes the importance of proper investigation rather than mere accusation. This educational function may limit the film's creative freedom while enhancing its institutional value, positioning the prosecutor as a tool for legal public education as much as a commercial entertainment product. The international distribution of this educational content extends Chinese legal soft power beyond national borders, with global audiences receiving instruction in Chinese legal values through the accessible medium of action cinema. Donnie Yen's performance, range and restraint. Donnie Yen's performance as Fok Chi-ho demonstrates range beyond his established action persona, with the legal scenes requiring dramatic skills that differ from the physical expression that defined his earlier work. This steely restraint and emotional depth that critics identified suggests a performance that communicates internal conflict through subtle means rather than the overt expression characteristic of action cinema. The courtroom scenes require Yen to convey intellectual engagement and professional competence through dialogue delivery and physical stillness, skills that differ fundamentally from the dynamic movement of fight sequences. The performance must also bridge the gap between Fok's past as a police officer and present as a prosecutor, suggesting continuity of character across the 8-year transformation. This dual temporality requires Yen to portray both the impulsive physicality of the younger Fok and the disciplined restraint of the older prosecutor, sometimes within the same scene as memories intrude on present circumstances. The physical performance in action sequences demonstrates that Yen's martial arts skills remain impressive even at 61, with the choreography adapted to his current capabilities while maintaining the intensity that audiences expect. The integration of these different performance modes, physical and dramatic, past and present, creates a complex characterization that represents a significant achievement in Yen's acting career. The supporting cast, veterans and newcomers. The supporting cast of The Prosecutor combines veteran performers with newer faces, creating a multi-generational ensemble that reflects the film's interest in questions of legacy and institutional memory. Francis Ng's presence brings decades of Hong Kong cinema history to the production, his established screen persona adding weight to whatever role he plays. The decision to cast such a significant actor in a supporting role suggests either that the character is more important than initial reviews indicate, or that Ng's involvement reflects the project's prestige within the Hong Kong film industry. Julian Chung's casting as one of the corrupt attorneys uses his established star image in interesting ways, with the actor's familiar screen presence creating expectations that the character's villainy then subverts. Shirley Chan's relative newcomer status may have limited her ability to develop a character that reviewers found underdeveloped, with the screenplay failing to provide sufficient material for her to create a memorable performance. Mason Fung as Ma Ka-kit carries the emotional weight of the film's central injustice, with his performance needing to communicate vulnerability without becoming merely pathetic. Kent Cheng's casting suggests the possibility of comic relief, with the actor's established comedic persona potentially providing tonal contrast to the film's more serious elements. Michael Huey's presence similarly suggests comedic possibilities that reviews have not fully explored, with the veteran comedian's distinctive screen persona potentially contributing to the film's tonal complexity. The action legal hybrid, success or failure. The prosecutor's central experiment, combining action and legal drama into a single coherent film, has divided critics on whether the hybrid succeeds or fails. Those who praise the film see the combination as innovative, expanding the possibilities of both genres by demonstrating their compatibility. Those who criticize the film see the combination as incoherent, with neither element receiving sufficient attention to achieve its full potential. The truth likely lies between these positions, with the hybrid achieving partial success that satisfies some viewers while frustrating others. The action sequences benefit from the legal context that gives them narrative purpose, with Fok's violence justified by his pursuit of legal justice rather than mere revenge. The legal scenes benefit from the action elements that maintain audience engagement during procedural sequences that might otherwise become tedious. The transitions between modes remain problematic, with the tonal shifts creating disorientation that some viewers find alienating. The film's failure to fully integrate these elements, to create scenes that combine legal argument and physical action rather than alternating between them, represents a missed opportunity that might have addressed critical concerns. Despite these limitations, the hybrid experiment demonstrates that action cinema can engage with serious themes without abandoning its entertainment functions. Comparison to legal thrillers. The prosecutor's legal elements invite comparison to established legal thrillers, a comparison that reveals both the film's achievements and its limitations. Classic legal thrillers like Anatomy of a Murder or The Verdict create suspense through procedural detail and moral ambiguity, with courtroom scenes functioning as dramatic climaxes rather than obstacles to action. The prosecutor's legal sequences lack this dramatic intensity according to several critics, with the case against Ma Ka-kit failing to generate the complexity that characterizes the best examples of the genre. The comparison to John Grisham adaptations reveals differences in narrative focus, with American legal thrillers typically exploring systemic corruption through individual cases, while the prosecutor treats corruption as exceptional rather than structural. The Hong Kong legal context adds cultural specificity that distinguishes the prosecutor from Western examples, with the barrister's wigs and specific procedural details creating authenticity that international audiences may not fully appreciate. The integration of action sequences distinguishes the prosecutor from most legal thrillers, which rarely feature extended fight choreography as part of their narrative strategies. This action element creates a different kind of audience engagement, with physical confrontation providing visceral satisfaction that legal argument alone cannot achieve. The comparison ultimately reveals the prosecutor as a unique hybrid that draws on legal thriller conventions without fully committing to the genre's demands for procedural complexity. Comparison to Donnie Yen's previous films. The prosecutor's place within Donnie Yen's filmography reveals both continuity and evolution in his artistic development. The Ip Man franchise established Yen's ability to carry dramatic narratives while showcasing martial arts skills, with Wing Chun's philosophical dimensions allowing for engagement with themes beyond pure action. The prosecutor extends this dramatic ambition into legal territory, with the courtroom scenes representing new challenges that differ from the historical setting of the Ip Man films. The modern setting of the prosecutor distinguishes it from Yen's period films, allowing for engagement with contemporary social issues that historical settings preclude. The action choreography reflects Yen's evolving capabilities, with the grounded, gritty style contrasting with the more stylized martial arts of earlier films like Iron Monkey or Flashpoint. The directorial role represents a return to behind-the-camera work that Yen has pursued throughout his career, with the prosecutor demonstrating growth from earlier directorial efforts. The collaboration with the Supreme People's Procuratorate distinguishes the prosecutor from Yen's earlier work, introducing institutional constraints and opportunities that previous projects lacked. This institutional involvement positions the prosecutor within broader trends in Chinese cinema, where government collaboration has become increasingly common for commercial films. The influence of Hong Kong cinema history. The prosecutor emerges from a Hong Kong cinema tradition that has historically celebrated both action spectacle and social critique, with the film's hybrid nature reflecting this dual heritage. The action sequences draw on the tradition established by Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, and Sammo Hung, with their emphasis on physical skill and choreographic creativity. The legal elements connect to a less prominent but significant tradition of courtroom drama in Hong Kong cinema, with films like The Accused exploring similar territory. The film's pro-establishment stance represents a departure from the anti-authoritarian impulses that characterized many classic Hong Kong films, reflecting the political changes that have reshaped the territory's cultural landscape. The presence of actors like Francis Ng and Kent Chung connects the prosecutor to the broader history of Hong Kong cinema, with their careers spanning decades of industry development. The production values and technical sophistication reflect the evolution of Hong Kong filmmaking, with the first-person shooter sequence demonstrating openness to new visual techniques. The international distribution strategy acknowledges the global audience for Hong Kong cinema, with the prosecutor seeking to maintain relevance beyond the local market that historically sustained the industry. Gender representation. Women in the prosecutor. The representation of women in the prosecutor reflects broader patterns in Hong Kong action cinema, with female characters typically occupying supporting roles that serve the male protagonist's journey. Shirley Chan's character as one of the corrupt defense attorneys represents one of the few significant female roles in the film, though critics have noted that the character remains underdeveloped. The absence of substantial female characters in leadership positions within the legal system suggests either that the film reflects reality or that the screenplay failed to imagine alternative possibilities. The treatment of female characters in action sequences likely follows genre conventions, with women either absent from physical conflict or participating in limited ways that maintain the focus on Yen's martial arts skills. The potential for a female character to challenge or support Fox's crusade remains unexplored, with the screenplay's focus on institutional conflict precluding romantic or professional relationships that might have developed female perspectives on the central legal case. This limited representation may reflect the film's target audience assumptions, with action cinema traditionally marketed primarily to male viewers. The critical silence on gender issues in reviews suggests that the film's treatment of women is neither notably progressive nor egregiously regressive, simply reproducing genre conventions without drawing attention to its choices. Class analysis: the vulnerable and the powerful. The prosecutor engages with class issues through its portrayal of Ma Ka-kit as a victim from the slums, suggesting that economic vulnerability increases susceptibility to legal victimization. The contrast between Ma's poverty and the affluence of the corrupt attorneys who defend him creates visual and thematic tension, with the legal system's treatment of these different classes revealing its biases. Fox's middle-class position as a government employee places him between these extremes, able to navigate institutional structures while understanding the vulnerabilities that poverty creates. The criminal organizations that exploit Ma represent the intersection of wealth and corruption, with their ability to purchase legal representation demonstrating how economic power translates into legal advantage. The film's resolution presumably restores Ma to freedom and innocence, suggesting that the justice system can overcome class bias when dedicated individuals pursue truth. Yet the obstacles that Fox faces in achieving this outcome demonstrate the difficulties of challenging economic power within legal frameworks. The film's treatment of class aligns with its overall political positioning, with individual dedication rather than structural change presented as the solution to class-based injustice. The moral geography of Hong Kong. The prosecutor's Hong Kong setting provides a moral geography that maps virtue and vice onto specific urban spaces, with different locations carrying ethical significance within the film's visual language. The courtroom represents institutional virtue, a space where justice is ideally served through proper procedure and evidence. The slums where Ma Ka-kit originates represent vulnerability, with poverty creating conditions that enable victimization. The nightclub where the rooftop brawl occurs represents moral corruption, with entertainment masking criminal activity. The metro train where the climax unfolds represents public space, with ordinary citizens going about their lives as violence erupts among them. This moral geography draws on established conventions in Hong Kong cinema, where specific locations carry meanings accumulated through decades of films. The film's mapping of virtue and vice onto urban space reflects broader cultural assumptions about the relationship between place and morality in Hong Kong. The contrast between institutional spaces and street-level locations reinforces the film's thematic interest in the relationship between legal authority and physical reality. The production design and cinematography work together to establish this moral geography, with lighting, color, and composition communicating ethical significance through visual means. The ending: justice achieved and its costs. The prosecutor's ending presumably achieves justice for Ma Ka-kit, with Fox's persistence overcoming the obstacles that corrupt interests placed in his path. Yet the film's acknowledgement of the costs of this achievement, the physical injuries, the institutional resistance, the personal sacrifices, prevents the ending from feeling merely triumphant. The resolution likely reaffirms the legal system's fundamental soundness, while acknowledging that achieving justice within that system requires exceptional dedication. The eternal light of justice theme presumably receives explicit articulation in the ending, with the film's final images communicating its thematic message about the relationship between individual effort and institutional justice. The action climax aboard the metro train provides physical resolution to the conflict, with the defeat of corrupt forces enabling the legal victory that follows. This sequencing, action before legal resolution, suggests that physical intervention creates conditions for legal justice rather than substituting for it. The ending's emotional impact derives from the accumulated frustrations and sacrifices that preceded it, with Ma's exoneration providing cathartic release after extended tension. The final shots likely return to Fox's character development, showing how his journey has changed him and suggesting his future direction as a prosecutor committed to genuine justice. Legacy and influence. The prosecutor's place in film history. The prosecutor's legacy within film history will depend on multiple factors, including its influence on subsequent genre hybrids, its role in Donnie Yen's career evolution, and its significance within the broader context of Hong Kong cinema's political transformation. The film's attempt to combine action and legal drama may inspire future experiments in genre blending, with filmmakers learning from both its successes and failures. The presence of institutional collaboration from China's Supreme People's Procuratorate represents a model for future productions seeking government involvement, with implications for creative freedom and ideological alignment. The film's success at the Hong Kong box office despite critical reservations demonstrates the continued viability of star-driven commercial cinema, with Donnie Yen's popularity proving resilient to critical doubt. The international distribution through streaming platforms ensures the film's accessibility to global audiences, potentially influencing perceptions of Chinese legal institutions among viewers worldwide. The film's treatment of aging in action cinema offers a template for other stars approaching the physical limitations that come with advancing years. The prosecutor's specific choices, the hybrid genre, the pro-institutional stance, the metatextual aging narrative, will be studied by scholars interested in the evolution of Hong Kong cinema in the post-colonial era. The future of Donnie Yen's career. The prosecutor's performance and reception will influence the trajectory of Donnie Yen's career, with implications for his future projects and evolving screen persona. The film's demonstration that Yen can carry legal drama suggests possibilities for further genre expansion, potentially leading to projects that continue to develop his dramatic capabilities while maintaining his action credentials. The box office success indicates continued commercial viability, reassuring producers that Yen remains a valuable investment despite his age. The critical response, mixed but with significant praise for his performance, suggests that Yen's evolution as an actor has been recognized, potentially opening doors to roles that emphasize dramatic depth over physical spectacle. The institutional collaboration with the Supreme People's Procuratorate may lead to further government partnerships, with implications for the political positioning of Yen's future work. The film's engagement with aging suggests that Yen is thinking carefully about his career's future, planning for a time when physical limitations necessitate greater reliance on dramatic skills. The international distribution through streaming platforms exposes Yen to global audiences who may not have encountered his earlier work, potentially expanding his fanbase beyond the established action cinema audience. The Prosecutor represents one possible future for Yen's career, demonstrating that evolution is possible without abandoning the skills that built his reputation. The Hong Kong film industry in transition. The Prosecutor emerges from a Hong Kong film industry undergoing significant transformation, with the political changes following the territory's return to Chinese sovereignty reshaping the conditions of production and distribution. The collaboration with Chinese government institutions reflects the integration of Hong Kong cinema into broader Chinese cultural industries, with implications for creative freedom and ideological alignment. The film's pro-establishment stance represents accommodation to political realities that earlier Hong Kong filmmakers might have resisted or subverted. The continued production of action cinema in Hong Kong demonstrates the genre's resilience despite political constraints, with martial arts remaining a viable commercial category. The presence of international streaming distribution suggests new opportunities for Hong Kong cinema to reach global audiences, potentially compensating for declining theatrical markets. The presence of Japanese action directors indicates continued regional collaboration, with expertise flowing across borders despite political tensions. The Prosecutor's success may encourage further investment in Hong Kong production, demonstrating that locally produced films can achieve commercial success while meeting institutional requirements. Audience reception, beyond critical consensus. The audience reception of The Prosecutor differs from critical consensus in ways that reveal the limitations of professional criticism in capturing popular response. The 2-week run at the top of the Hong Kong box office indicates that audiences embraced the film despite the tonal inconsistencies that critics identified, finding value in elements that reviewers dismissed. The action sequences likely attracted audiences seeking entertainment, with Yen's martial arts skills providing the primary draw that motivated attendance. The legal elements may have added value for audiences interested in seeing Yen attempt something different, with the novelty of courtroom drama featuring a martial arts star creating curiosity. The pro-establishment messaging may have resonated with Hong Kong audiences who have adapted to the political realities of post-colonial life, with the film's celebration of legal institutions aligning with official narratives that have become normalized. The word of mouth that sustained the film's box office performance suggests that initial audiences recommended it to others, sharing their enthusiasm despite whatever reservations they may have had about specific elements. The international streaming audience will likely respond differently still, with viewers encountering the film outside its original cultural context and bringing different expectations to their experience. The Prosecutor in the context of Chinese cinema. The Prosecutor's development with Chinese government involvement positions it within broader trends in Chinese cinema, where institutional collaboration has become increasingly common for commercial productions. The Chinese film industry's growth has created opportunities for Hong Kong filmmakers to access mainland markets, with collaboration often requiring accommodation to political requirements. The Prosecutor's celebration of Chinese legal institutions represents this accommodation, with the film serving ideological functions that extend beyond entertainment. The inclusion of Chinese government institutions in the production process reflects the integration of cultural industries into state structures, with creative work serving national interests alongside commercial goals. The international distribution of The Prosecutor extends Chinese soft power through entertainment media, with global audiences receiving positive representations of Chinese institutions through accessible genre formats. The film's treatment of corruption as exceptional rather than systemic aligns with official Chinese narratives about legal reform, suggesting that the system works when individuals are dedicated and honest. This positioning within Chinese cinema's political economy adds complexity to the film's reception, with viewers potentially responding to its ideological content differently based on their own political perspectives. Martial arts cinema's evolution. The Prosecutor represents a specific moment in the evolution of martial arts cinema, with the genre adapting to changing stars, audience expectations, and cultural contexts. The genre's traditional emphasis on physical skill and choreographic innovation remains central to The Prosecutor's appeal, with Yen's action sequences maintaining the standards established by earlier masters. The integration of legal drama represents adaptation to aging stars whose physical capabilities necessitate dramatic alternatives to pure action. The pro-institutional stance reflects the genre's political evolution within the Chinese cultural context, with earlier anti-authoritarian impulses giving way to official endorsement. The technical innovations, the first-person shooter perspective, the metro train set, demonstrate the genre's continued capacity for visual experimentation. The international distribution reflects the genre's global audience, with martial arts cinema maintaining appeal across cultural boundaries. The Prosecutor's specific choices will influence future martial arts films, with other aging stars potentially following Yen's example in developing dramatic dimensions alongside action skills. The genre's resilience through decades of political and economic change suggests that martial arts cinema will continue evolving, finding new forms and meanings in changing circumstances. Conclusion. The Prosecutor's dual legacy. The Prosecutor stands as a curious artifact in Donnie Yen's filmography, a work that attempts to reconcile the physical spectacle of Hong Kong action cinema with the procedural seriousness of a legal thriller, creating a hybrid that succeeds and fails in different measures. The film undeniably represents Yen's ambition to broaden his artistic palette without abandoning his core appeal, demonstrating continued relevance at an age when many action stars have retired or diminished. The celebration of justice within institutional frameworks, and the approval from China's legal authorities, positions the film as a distinctly different kind of Hong Kong film than the rebellious crime dramas of previous decades. The Prosecutor is perhaps best understood not as a pure genre piece, but as a portrait of an aging action star reflecting on what justice means beyond physical force, with the film's themes mirroring its star's own negotiation with professional evolution. The metatextual dimension adds depth for audiences familiar with Yen's career, transforming what might otherwise be a straightforward entertainment into a meditation on legacy and artistic growth. As Yen himself seems to acknowledge through Fox's journey, integrity, empathy, and relentless pursuit of truth matter as much as any roundhouse kick, a message that transcends the film's specific limitations to speak to broader human concerns about justice, aging, and the meaning of a life dedicated to protecting others. The Prosecutor's flaws, the tonal inconsistencies, the underdeveloped villains, the pro-establishment messaging that some find propagandistic, are balanced against its achievements. Yen's committed performance, the innovative action choreography, the sincere engagement with legal themes. This balance of strengths and weaknesses makes The Prosecutor a fascinating case study in the possibilities and limitations of genre hybridization, demonstrating both what can be gained and what is lost when filmmakers attempt to expand beyond established formulas. The psychological complexity of Fok Chi-ho extends far beyond the surface-level transformation from police officer to prosecutor, for his journey represents a profound philosophical reconciliation between the immediate satisfaction of physical justice and the patient demands of legal procedure, a reconciliation that requires him to fundamentally rewire his instincts and impulses rather than simply changing his professional title or wardrobe. The film subtly suggests that Fok's initial disillusionment with the justice system stems not from its failure to punish the guilty, but from his own unrealistic expectations about how justice should operate in a complex society governed by rules and evidentiary standards. Expectations shaped by years of police work, where the identity of wrongdoers often seems obvious even when legally provable facts remain elusive. His decision to become a prosecutor, therefore, represents not merely a career change, but a philosophical conversion, a recognition that true justice requires submission to processes that sometimes frustrate immediate desires for vengeance or retribution. The 8-year gap between his police career and his emergence as a prosecutor remains largely unexplored in the film. Yet this absence creates productive space for audiences to imagine the rigorous self-discipline required to transform from action-oriented law enforcement to procedure-bound legal practice. The character's physical restraint in courtroom scenes, his deliberate speech patterns, and his visible effort to control impulses that once served him well all communicate the ongoing struggle of this transformation, suggesting that the old Fok remains present beneath the composed exterior of the prosecutor. This internal tension gives dramatic weight to scenes that might otherwise function merely as procedural exposition, for audiences sense that Fok is constantly fighting battles on two fronts, one against the corrupt forces seeking to undermine justice, and another against his own instincts pushing him toward direct action rather than legal process. The film's action sequences thus acquire additional meaning as releases of accumulated tension, moments when Fok's suppressed physicality erupts in controlled violence that serves his legal objectives, allowing audiences to experience the catharsis that the character himself must continually postpone during courtroom proceedings. This psychological framework elevates The Prosecutor beyond mere genre exercise, suggesting that the film is fundamentally about the discipline required to work within systems rather than against them, a theme with resonance far beyond the specific context of Hong Kong law. The symbolism embedded throughout The Prosecutor operates on multiple levels, with the most obvious and frequently discussed symbol being the barrister's wig that Fok wears during courtroom proceedings, an accessory that carries immense historical weight derived from Hong Kong's colonial past and the British legal traditions that continue to shape the territory's judicial system, even after the handover to Chinese sovereignty in 1997. Yet the wig also functions as a personal symbol of transformation for Fok himself, representing the restraint and formality that his new profession demands of him. The visual contrast between Fok in his wig arguing legal points and Fok in action sequences fighting criminals creates an immediate shorthand for the film's central thematic tension, allowing audiences to grasp the fundamental conflict between institutional procedure and physical intervention without requiring lengthy exposition. The hockey stick that Fok employs as an improvised weapon during one action sequence carries its own symbolic weight, for unlike the specialized weapons that typically appear in martial arts cinema, swords, staffs, nunchaku, the hockey stick is an everyday object that anyone might encounter, suggesting that the capacity for justice-seeking action exists within ordinary people rather than requiring specialized training or extraordinary abilities. The metro train where the climactic fight occurs represents yet another symbolic space, for public transportation serves as the great equalizer in urban environments, a space where citizens of all classes and backgrounds share proximity, and the violence that erupts there threatens not merely Fok or his opponents, but the ordinary commuters who represent the broader public that the justice system exists to protect. The neck brace that Fok wears during his testimony in the opening sequence functions as perhaps the film's most poignant symbol, for it represents the physical manifestation of institutional failure, the bodily harm that results when justice fails, and the guilty escape consequences, yet it also suggests the vulnerability that accompanies dedication to principle, the willingness to suffer injury in pursuit of what is right. The nightclub rooftop, where one action sequence unfolds, symbolizes the hidden spaces where criminal activity flourishes, above the heads of ordinary citizens who remain unaware of the corruption operating literally over their heads, a spatial metaphor for the invisibility of systemic injustice to those not directly affected by it. The eternal light of justice, that the film explicitly invokes through dialogue and imagery, draws on ancient symbolic traditions that associate illumination with truth and darkness with deception, creating a moral framework that positions Fox's work as bringing light to dark places, exposing corruption to the clarifying power of legal scrutiny. The cultural significance of The Prosecutor extends into questions about Hong Kong's evolving identity in the post-colonial era for the film's celebration of legal institutions developed with Chinese government collaboration represents a significant departure from the anti-authoritarian traditions that characterized much of Hong Kong's cinema before and immediately after the 1997 handover, when filmmakers often portrayed police and government institutions as corrupt, incompetent, or actively hostile to justice in ways that reflected anxieties about the territory's political future under Chinese sovereignty. The decision to portray the legal system as fundamentally sound, with corruption represented as the work of individual bad actors rather than systemic flaws, aligns with official Chinese narratives about the effectiveness of legal reform and the integrity of state institutions, suggesting that The Prosecutor participates in a broader cultural project of legitimizing Chinese governance through popular entertainment. Yet the film's treatment of this theme is not without nuance, for Fox struggles against colleagues who prioritize conviction rates over genuine justice, acknowledges that institutional dysfunction exists even within a fundamentally sound system, a recognition that prevents the film from becoming pure propaganda while still maintaining its pro-establishment stance. The presence of British legal traditions, the wigs, the formal language, the adversarial procedures, within a film that celebrates Chinese institutional achievement creates interesting tensions. For these traditions represent the colonial past that China's sovereignty supposedly superseded, yet they remain visible and functional within the film's vision of Hong Kong justice. This coexistence of British legal forms with Chinese political authority suggests a hybrid identity that neither fully abandons colonial heritage nor fully embraces mainland norms, a liminal position that characterizes contemporary Hong Kong culture more broadly. The film's international distribution through streaming platforms extends this cultural negotiation to global audiences, who encounter Hong Kong's complex identity through the accessible medium of action cinema, without necessarily understanding the historical and political context that shapes what they see. The collaboration with the Supreme People's Procuratorate demonstrates how Chinese state institutions have learned to use popular culture for soft power purposes, with entertainment serving ideological functions that traditional propaganda cannot achieve as effectively. The directorial choices made by Donnie Yen throughout The Prosecutor reveal a filmmaker consciously working to expand his artistic range while respecting the expectations of his established audience, a balancing act that requires careful calibration of action and drama to satisfy both constituencies simultaneously. And the film's structural alternation between courtroom scenes and fight sequences reflects this dual commitment to evolution and continuity. The decision to employ first-person shooter perspectives during the opening raid sequence represents a significant technical gamble, for while this visual approach has become common in video games and some Western action films, it remains relatively unusual in Hong Kong cinema, where martial arts choreography traditionally depends on wider shots that show complete bodies in motion rather than the fragmented, subjective views that first-person perspective necessarily entails. The successful integration of this technique demonstrates Yen's willingness to experiment with visual storytelling methods beyond the conventions that defined his earlier work, while the return to more traditional cinematography for subsequent fight scenes reassures audiences that the fundamentals of martial arts cinema remain intact. The casting choices reflect similar careful calculation, with the presence of veteran actors like Francis Ng and Kent Chung providing continuity with Hong Kong cinema history, while newer performers like Mason Fung and Shirley represent the industry's future, creating a multi-generational ensemble that mirrors the film's thematic interest in questions of legacy and institutional memory. The action choreography's progression from gun-based combat to hand-to-hand fighting demonstrates directorial awareness of Yen's aging physicality, with the film gradually shifting toward fighting styles that emphasize technique and efficiency over acrobatics and endurance, allowing the star to maintain credibility while acknowledging realistic limitations. The collaboration with Japanese action directors brings fresh perspectives to fight choreography, with Aoki and Tanagaki's experience in Japanese action cinema informing sequences that feel distinct from the Hong Kong tradition while remaining compatible with Yen's established style. The overall directorial approach suggests a filmmaker secure enough in his abilities to seek outside expertise and experiment with new techniques, yet experienced enough to understand what his audience expects and how to deliver those expectations while pushing boundaries. The thematic exploration of institutional trust in The Prosecutor resonates with contemporary global concerns about the legitimacy of legal systems and the conditions under which citizens should place faith in governmental institutions, questions that have become particularly urgent in an era of declining institutional confidence across many democratic societies, though the film's answer, that institutions are fundamentally sound and require only dedicated individuals to fulfill their promise, reflects a specific political positioning that not all audiences will accept. The film's portrayal of corruption as exceptional rather than systemic distinguishes it from the cynical perspectives that dominate much contemporary crime fiction, where institutional corruption typically extends throughout organizational hierarchies and defeats isolated attempts at reform. Fox's success in achieving justice through proper procedures rather than extralegal action suggests that the system works when individuals work within it, a message that carries different meanings in different political contexts, and that will resonate differently with audiences based on their own experiences with legal institutions. The film's emphasis on evidence and procedure over intuition and force represents a philosophical commitment to due process that transcends the specific case at its center, suggesting that the protection of procedural rights matters, even when those protections sometimes benefit the guilty or delay justice for the innocent. This commitment to process over outcome distinguishes The Prosecutor from the vigilante tradition in action cinema, where heroes typically bypass legal procedures to achieve outcomes that audiences know are just, creating a morally satisfying but legally problematic model of justice. The film's willingness to show Fox frustrated by procedural requirements, to acknowledge that due process creates genuine obstacles to achieving justice, demonstrates intellectual honesty about the costs of legal protections while still affirming their fundamental value. The resolution presumably shows that these procedures, properly followed, ultimately lead to truth and justice, validating the patient, disciplined approach that Fox has adopted. This validation of institutional process over individual intuition carries political implications that extend beyond the film's immediate narrative context. The relationship between the prosecutor and the established conventions of Hong Kong action cinema reveals both continuities and departures that illuminate the genre's evolution over recent decades. For while the film maintains the spectacular martial arts choreography and heroic protagonists that define the tradition, its thematic orientation toward institutional authority rather than anti-establishment rebellion marks a significant shift from the genre's historical positioning. Classic Hong Kong action films of the 1980s and 1990s frequently portrayed police and legal institutions as obstacles to justice, with heroes like Jackie Chan's Inspector Chan or Chow Yun-fat's Mark Gore operating outside or against official structures to achieve outcomes that institutions could not or would not deliver, reflecting anxieties about corruption and incompetence that resonated with audiences living under uncertain political circumstances. The Prosecutor reverses this dynamic, positioning institutional affiliation as the pathway to genuine justice and individual action as supplemental rather than alternative to legal process, a reversal that reflects both the changing political circumstances of Hong Kong and the specific requirements of the film's institutional collaboration. Yet the film does not entirely abandon the genre's traditional skepticism. For Fox conflicts with colleagues who prioritize conviction rates over justice demonstrate that institutional dysfunction remains a concern even within the film's generally pro-establishment framework. The action sequences maintain the genre's commitment to physical spectacle, with Yen's martial arts skills remaining the primary attraction for audiences who have followed his career through decades of fight scenes and stunt work. The film's willingness to acknowledge aging represents another departure from genre conventions, which typically present heroes as ageless and physically invulnerable regardless of the actor's actual ages or physical conditions. This honesty about physical limitations may influence future action films, creating space for more realistic representations of aging heroes whose capabilities evolve rather than remaining static across decades of sequels and franchises. The legal accuracy and procedural authenticity of The Prosecutor, developed with input from China's Supreme People's Procuratorate, distinguishes it from many legal dramas that prioritize dramatic convenience over realistic representation of how legal systems actually function, for the institutional collaboration presumably ensured that courtroom scenes reflect genuine procedures rather than the simplified or distorted versions that appear in films made without such expert input. This commitment to accuracy extends beyond mere technical correctness to encompass the philosophical values that underlie legal practice, with the film emphasizing the importance of evidence, the presumption of innocence, and the necessity of proving guilt beyond reasonable doubt rather than relying on intuition or moral certainty. The presence of these values within a film developed with Chinese government involvement is not without irony, for China's legal system has faced international criticism for failing to consistently uphold such protections in practice, particularly in politically sensitive cases where state interests outweigh individual rights. The film's portrayal of a legal system that protects the innocent and punishes only the guilty may be aspirational rather than descriptive, presenting an idealized vision of Chinese justice that official institutions wish to promote both domestically and internationally. Yet the aspiration itself carries significance, suggesting that these values, due process, evidentiary standards, presumption of innocence, represent ideals that Chinese legal authorities acknowledge as important even when practice falls short of theory. The film's educational function in teaching audiences about legal procedures and values aligns with this aspirational dimension, using entertainment to cultivate public understanding of and support for legal institutions. The international distribution of this educational content extends Chinese legal soft power beyond national borders, introducing global audiences to Chinese legal values through the accessible medium of action cinema. The emotional architecture of The Prosecutor depends heavily on the audience's investment in Ma Ka-kit's fate, for the young man's wrongful conviction provides the moral urgency that drives Fox's crusade and justifies the violence that follows. Yet the film's limited development of Ma as a character may undermine this emotional foundation for viewers who struggle to connect with his suffering beyond abstract sympathy for injustice. The brief glimpses of Ma's life in the slums establish his vulnerability without fully developing his personality, his relationships, or his specific circumstances in ways that might have created deeper emotional engagement with his plight. The 27-year sentence he faces represents more than 2 decades of imprisonment, effectively destroying his young adulthood and any future he might have built. Yet the film's presentation of this devastating consequence remains somewhat abstract, communicated through legal proceedings rather than through intimate portrayal of what this sentence means for Ma himself. The presence of his family, friends, or community supporters might have provided emotional anchors that make his suffering more tangible to audiences, but reviews suggest that such supporting characters are largely absent from the narrative. This absence may reflect the film's primary focus on Fox's journey rather than Ma's experience, with the young man serving as a narrative device that motivates the protagonist's actions rather than as a fully realized character whose fate audiences deeply care about. The emotional weight of the film thus rests primarily on Yen's performance and the audience's pre-existing investment in his screen persona, with Ma's exoneration mattering because Fox cares about it rather than because audiences have developed independent emotional connection to the young man. This structural choice limits the film's emotional range while maintaining focus on the star's character development, a trade-off that prioritizes Yen's showcase over the ensemble drama that might have emerged from more balanced attention to all characters involved. The action sequences in The Prosecutor achieve their effectiveness not merely through choreographic skill, but through the narrative integration that gives each fight meaning beyond pure spectacle. For when Fox engages in combat, the violence serves his legal objectives, protecting witnesses, gathering evidence, preventing the elimination of those who might testify, rather than functioning as disconnected set pieces designed solely to showcase Yen's martial arts abilities. This integration of action into narrative purpose distinguishes the film from action cinema that treats fight scenes as independent attractions, with the violence in The Prosecutor emerging organically from the legal conflict at its center and contributing directly to its resolution. The nightclub rooftop brawl occurs because Fox has identified individuals who might provide testimony beneficial to Ma's case, and the fight represents the corrupt forces' attempt to prevent that testimony from reaching the court, making the action a continuation of the legal struggle by other means. The metro train climax similarly serves narrative function beyond providing an impressive setting for the final confrontation. for the fight represents the culmination of the legal conflict with the defeat of corrupt forces, enabling the legal victory that follows. This careful integration suggests that director Yen understands action as a storytelling tool rather than merely a commercial requirement, with each fight scene advancing plot and character development while providing the visceral excitement that audiences expect. The progression from gun-based action to hand-to-hand combat carries thematic significance, moving from the impersonal violence of institutional enforcement toward the intimate confrontation of personal justice, suggesting that the film's climax requires direct physical confrontation rather than the distance that firearms create. The choreography emphasizes consequence and cost, with fighters showing exhaustion and injury rather than maintaining superhuman resilience, reinforcing the film's realistic tone and its acknowledgement of physical limitations. The musical score of The Prosecutor, while not extensively discussed in critical reviews, presumably plays a significant role in managing the tonal shifts between action and legal scenes, with different musical approaches required for sequences that differ so dramatically in pace, intensity, and emotional register. For the scoring must bridge the gap between the adrenaline-driven excitement of fight choreography and the contemplative tension of courtroom argument without calling attention to the transitions in ways that might intensify the disorientation some critics identified. The absence of critical attention to the score may indicate that it functions effectively as invisible support, enhancing emotional engagement without drawing notice to itself, or it may suggest that the music is unremarkable, neither notably successful nor notably problematic in its execution. The action sequences likely employ the driving percussion and dramatic orchestration characteristic of contemporary action cinema, with rhythmic elements that reinforce the physical impact of fights and chases. The legal scenes require different musical treatment, with subtle tension building that supports dialogue without overwhelming it, allowing audiences to focus on the verbal sparring that constitutes courtroom combat. The thematic material associated with justice, the eternal light motif that recurs throughout the film, presumably receives musical expression through recurring melodic or harmonic elements that create continuity across scenes and genres. The absence of prominent musical discussion in reviews may reflect broader critical tendencies to focus on visual and performance elements when analyzing action films, with scoring receiving less attention than in criticism of other genres. The film's emotional impact depends significantly on musical choices that guide audience response to scenes that might otherwise feel flat or manipulative, with score functioning as an invisible hand that shapes interpretation without audiences consciously registering its influence.